In part two of our look at population geography, we're going to look at two models or graphic representations that show us composition and change existing within our different populations. In this part of the lecture, I encourage you to open up the study guide attached to Blackboard. What I find is a good learning tool for understanding new models is to draw the model. As we go through this discussion, you could plug in the pieces and better understand the factors and the conditions that are happening in each of these countries. So pause and take a moment to open up the attached study guide as we begin our look at these graphic representations. The first model we're going to examine is known as the demographic transition model. And this model is based on the history of population change as we view it through natural increase, urbanization, and industrialization. So right away, we should recognize the key factors here. One, we're measuring births minus deaths for natural increases, and then we're looking at the economic factors of urbanization and industrialization. As we go through the model, we're going to see how these different economic, social, cultural, and political factors influence the trajectory of our different populations. It's really important to note that the status of women is key to understanding the different phases within this model. This model not only tells us about the past, but also provides clues for the future. How does a country plan for its demographic future? Are there going to be a number of kids in elementary school? Are we seeing our elderly population grow disproportionately? And if these factors come into play, a country needs to plan for its future dependents. Some of the limitations of this model include that it's based on the history of European countries and the United States. While we're recognizing a lot of these shifts happening around the world, including in our developing countries today, we can't state for certain that this is a one-for-one application. But we are recognizing similarities in natural increase, urbanization, industrialization, in the status of women, and how these different factors affect population change. The second model we're going to look at is known as a population pyramid. And the population pyramid shows age and gender cohorts within a population. It also reflects these different factors and policies. And a population pyramid will also tell us about the future in a different visualization, but both of these models combined help us understand where our population is today, what it went through in the past, and what to predict going forward. The image on your screen is the demographic transition model. And again, I encourage you to use the study guide, and I also encourage you to draw this model. So this would be a good point in the lecture to pause and review as we go through these different stages. I truly feel that drawing this will help you better understand what's going on. The different stages of the model are listed here, 4 stages. Many of our modern current models and our future models are going to include a 5th stage, something we'll talk about here. At the bottom, you'll notice the change in natural increase. You'll notice that birth and death rates vary in different stages. So we'll talk about why this is happening. It's important to notice that in stage 1, we have a very high birth and death rate. It's also important to acknowledge that no country today is in stage 1 of the demographic transition model. During this time, population change was very slow. So this would have been pre-1750, if you recall from part 1 of our lecture. The CBR and CDR are both high. Life expectancy was only about 30 years old in stage 1. So that tells us that quality of life, again, access to medicine, knowledge and technology surrounding sanitation were limited. In phase 2, and you'll notice that at the top of the model, I included some countries that we'll also visit during our look at population pyramids. In stage 2, you see Mali. Mali is characterized by high birth rate and rapidly falling death rate. Mali today is going through what's known as a population explosion. What's going on in a country like Mali and other stage 2 countries is that they're starting to transition from agriculture to early industry. So we're seeing that economic shift. Culture in this case is slow to react, meaning that families are traditionally large. So these large families are going to persist through stage two, even though industrialization and a mechanized economy doesn't support large families. Children in this stage go from an asset working on family farms to a liability, requiring more education to later on join an industrialized workforce. So in this phase, we have this population explosion. Birth rate remains high, death rate falls. Another social factor in play here is that sanitation is improving, food storage is improving, access to medicine is improving. So our death rate is dropping rapidly. Again, just to recap, our economy is shifting from ag to industrialization. Socially, we have better medicine, advancements in medicine, food storage, and sanitation. Culturally, large families are deemed the norm, so they're going to persist. The status of women in stage two remains that of a traditional setting, where a woman is primarily working in the home, raising kids, supporting the family. In stage three, we see our birth rate start to fall and our death rate continues to fall. So our population is growing in stage three, it's just growing at a slower pace. This is what's known as the late industrial period. Our birth rate is beginning to drop, and our birth rate is beginning to drop for a couple reasons. One, that we find that we no longer need to have a lot of kids for a lot of kids to survive. So culturally, we're starting to adjust. What's most important in this stage is that women are now gaining opportunities in education in the workforce. So as women enter the workforce, as they pursue education longer, that delays when families start to have children. So instead of having kids at 16, 17, 18, women are prolonging that into their mid to late 20s in stage three. So by delaying the start of having expanding your family, we have fewer years to have kids. Again, women are now working, they're not in the home as they are in stage two. So we're seeing the status of women really start to transform our economy in addition to those different economic um, evolutions, the economic developments. We're going to come back to this idea of a demographic dividend. And this is where a country's economy could really hit its success story. When we have a slowing down of our population growth, but most of our population is young. We have a low dependency ratio here. Again, we'll come back to these terms, but it's important to note here that we are evolving, moving through an industrial economy. The status of women is changing, improving as opportunities in education in the workforce improve. And then we're seeing a reduction in our RNI. The rate of natural increase slows down because our birth rates are dipping dramatically. And then in stage four, we have countries like China, the United States, Japan, and Portugal, all at different phases. Here, we have a leveling out towards the end of stage four in our birth and death rates. This is known as a post-industrial economy. Living standards are high, but so too does the cost of living. So too the cost of living increases. The cost of childcare is excessive in stage four as we moved into this modern economy. Women are staying in school longer. They are more career focused. In the United States, we have half of our workforce today is men, half of our workforce is women. So we're seeing that the roles that were found primarily in stage two, traditional family setting, have shifted through stage three and into stage four. So as women pursue education for more years, start their career, they are further postponing their family planning. They're further postponing growing a family. So in stage four, we see fewer kids. The cost of kids is extremely high compared to our other stages, and also the gender equality found in academia and in the workplace is starting to become closer to even. So our population growth here is very slow. It's very stable. a concern as these countries move through stage 4 and the population growth stagnates or becomes even, is that if we have an elderly population, we can have a high dependency ratio. This is known as the graying of the population, and something we're going to come back to. But as our demographers and our population geographers continue to study this model, we're starting to recognize that countries are entering a prolonged phase where deaths exceed births. They're entering a prolonged phase where TFR, your total fertility rate, is less than 1.5. Remember, we need 2.1 in order to replace our current population. We have a negative RNI here, so our rate of natural increase is in fact a decrease. A country like the United States, something that I touched on before and can't emphasize enough, the United States would enter this potential stage 5 if it wasn't for in-migration. The United States population today is stabilized by migration. Otherwise, we would be facing situations similar to what we're seeing in Japan and Portugal. The dependency ratio looks at the percentage of your population that is of working age. A dependent is somebody that's under the age of 15 or over the age of 64. So if we have, as you see in Japan, a low percentage of our population within working age, it's difficult for a country to fund social services. So we have more of our people as dependents, liabilities. We have more of our people in this case requiring elderly support. In a country like Uganda, we have almost half of our population is under the age of 15. That requires your government to support schools, child care, infant health care, toddler health care, youth health care. So we're seeing that a dependency ratio really allows a country to examine where it needs to invest. A country like Uganda in the future is going to be in a better place because we have a lot of these kids that are under the age of 15 entering the workforce in the next decade. Whereas a place like Japan, we have very few kids that'll enter the workforce. And that becomes a concern as Japan, when it has a high quality of living, is going to face some financial hurdles. A high quality of living comes at a cost. And as we noted before, the population of Japan has a high life expectancy. So people are going to enter their late 60s and potentially live for 3 or more decades. And this population is going to require a tremendous amount of financial resources. The demographic dividend, on the other hand, looks at countries with a low dependency ratio. And when you have a low dependency ratio, you have lower social costs. You'll recall that stage 3 is where we find the opportunity for this demographic dividend. The demographic dividend is a time when we should find increased productivity. Remember that female participation begins to boom in this stage. We have a lowering fertility rate. So women again are entering colleges, they're pursuing their education further, and they're becoming more prevalent in the workforce. So this creates more economic productivity. Your elderly population is low in stage 3. Remember, you had a population explosion in stage 2, so as stage 2 moves into stage 3, you have a relatively young population. There are a number of short-term benefits here. Again, because your dependents are so low, so few, most of your population is working. When the United States started its Social Security program in the 1940s, we had 42 workers paying for one retiree. Today, we have about 2.5 workers paying for one retiree. So that small percentage of your paycheck that goes into the Social Security pool for elderly Americans. In the 1940s, 42 people were paying for one person collecting. So it was solvent. It was a tremendous amount of surplus. Today, we're down to 2.5. We're no longer solvent because it takes more than 2.5 people to support one retiree in Social Security. So our country was experiencing this dividend in the mid 1900s. Today we've moved past this dividend.